Hello friends, welcome back to Aunt Debbie's Boutique. Today we're finally going to get started on our coffee themed quilt. I found these fabrics, I think from the Fat Quarter shop, not 100% sure of that, and it's Benartex. I seem to have a thing for their fabrics lately. I've been buying quite a few of them. And it's called, the line is called For the Love of Coffee by Nicole DeCamp. It came with 17 fat quarters. And it wasn't enough for this quilt after I got started on it. So I had to order another 17. And I used about half of each one of those. So this quilt takes a lot of fabric. I also added in, because I was concerned there wasn't enough low volume prints in this. This is called Linen Closet 3, and I don't know who it's by, but I think I also got this from the Fat Quarter shop if I'm not mistaken. So there were 10 prints in there, and I used all 10 of them to help with some contrast on our quilt. Now the pattern I chose is called Galactic Melodies, and it's by May Lily Quilt Company. It kept popping up in my Facebook feed, and I just really liked this quilt right here. Now, my printer doesn't do it justice when I download the pattern and print it. It looks much better on Facebook, but still, I loved the quilt, but it looked to me like it was some sort of throw. It's laying next to a bed over here, and I didn't pay attention to the size, but the finished size is 82 by 98, which I believe is a queen size. I'm going to have to double check that, but anyway, it's much bigger than I first thought. Now, after working with this pattern, I can't say that I recommend it. There is a serious error in here, and I will show it to you and show you my workaround. But I sent an email to the company about 2 weeks ago, pointing it out to them, and I never even got a response. And usually you would get a response and a corrected pattern once they got it corrected, but I've heard nothing from them, and for that reason I can't recommend their patterns. I don't think I'll buy another one. But anyway, we're going to make this one, and I chose it for a lot of reasons. One, I liked it, but two, it had nice big pieces in it that would showcase these fabrics that have such big prints. I didn't want to chop these all up into little bitty pieces. So that's another reason I chose this one. Okay, let's get started on making our quilt. There's two blocks. There's an A block, and that's what all these are for, and that's where the serious error is. And there's a B block. You make 10 A's, and the A blocks are these stars. And you make 20 B's. Well, the B's are so easy that I'm just going to make them real quick, and we're going to get those out of the way. So let me move these blocks over. And when I cut these, I can't tell you sizes because that you need to buy the pattern for that. Even though I'm not really recommending the pattern, but if you can follow what I do to make the correction, you'll be fine with buying the pattern. But I had 17 fat quarters, and I need 20 blocks. So I made one of these great big blocks of every fat quarter, plus 3 of them had 2 blocks cut out of that. And then I took the rest of them and I separated them. Well, I took all of them again, and separated them and made two piles, darks and lights, two equal piles. That way I thought I'd get a better variety in my blocks if I knew every block was going to have a dark one and a light one. Okay, the first thing, as you can see, this block goes together just like this. Here's two squares we sew together, then we sew it to this big piece. So the first thing I'm going to do is take all of these over to the sewing machine, and I'm just going to chain stitch this seam. And I'm going to try to not pay any attention, or not very much attention, to the order they're in, unless I don't want two blocks that have the same print, or even the same print in a different color really together. But I'm going to try to do it as random as I can, because it's going to end up pretty random when we put it all together anyway. Okay, let's go sew these blocks up real quick. Okay, I've attached my quarter inch foot, sorry about that has the little flange, little edge over here that will keep my seams all at a 1/4 inch. And I am just I have the pile of light ones in my lap, and I have the dark ones over here to my left, and I'm just going to flip a light one on top of a dark one and keep sewing. I have a leader that gives me a running start so I don't have to back stitch. And we're off. Okay, I have sewn them all up, cut them apart. Better turn on my iron. And I made sure when I was stacking them that I put the dark fabric on top, because we are going to press to the dark side. To be honest, it doesn't really matter which way you press on these, because I don't believe it's going to intersect with another seam, except occasionally around when one of these blocks falls around the star blocks. And then it's just going to be hit or miss whether we've ironed them the right way or not. So we want to set our seam. That sets all the stitches in there real well, and it smooths out any puckering or gathering that might have occurred. And then flip it open, and it will keep the seam to the dark side if that's what was on top. I didn't mention, but I starched all of these with Best Press, Mary Ellen's Best Press. It's a starch alternative, and I like it because it's light and not flaky. Boy, my iron, it does that every so often, but this is the best iron. It's a Rowenta Perfect Seam Pro, and I love it. And I do use steam, I use starch. I know that's a controversial subject. Some people think makes the fabric shrink. It may, but my seams aren't that perfect anyway. So I haven't ever had any problems that I could attribute to the fact that I use steam or starch. few of mine don't seem to match real well. I'm hoping that that means one of them's too big, not that one of them's too small. I will measure them and square them up off camera. Okay. Now, I just want to interject a reminder in here that this channel is geared for beginners. So if you're an advanced seamstress and you think I'm showing too much detail or too many steps, I just ask you to please be patient. It's for the benefit of the beginners, and they do appreciate it. So that's why I do it. Now we're ready to sew this block onto this one. So I'm going to take them both over to the sewing machine. It's getting real crowded over there with such big blocks, and I occasionally bump the camera. I apologize for that, but we're going to pull it off. Okay, let's go sew this last seam, and then we'll have this block all done. All right, we're ready to press these, and I laid them all down with the large block on top so that we will press towards it. Again, I don't think it matters which way because these blocks are going to get turned all different directions, and sometimes they're going to nest the seams and some they won't, and we'll just have to deal with that then. But I want to iron towards the path of least resistance, so it's easiest to iron towards this flat piece of fabric than it is this one that has a seam. Now, something I failed to tell you. Let me find a good block here. Okay. If you notice, after I got over there and started sewing, I flipped the direction I was sewing. I first started out sewing with this block on top and realized that wasn't the way to go. I wanted this block on top, and I wanted the seam pointing down. That way, when I'm coming around here and stitching, this won't accidentally get caught the other direction. And even if you have to sew it one from that direction, you'll see it if it's on top, and you can lay it down the way it's supposed to go. So always put the side, when you can, the side with the most seams on top so you can see them and get them stitched down in the direction that you ironed them. Okay, I am going to iron these blocks real quick. And you don't have to watch me iron all of them, maybe a few. But I wanted to note that it took me 12 minutes to sew these two together, the two smaller blocks, and it took me 20 minutes to sew the bigger one on it. And so that's a total of 32 minutes, and we've made 20 blocks. So that's pretty good. If you can, that's 2/3 of our quilt. Now, granted, block A will be a little more time consuming, but it still shouldn't take that long. Okay, let me finish ironing these, and then we'll talk about block A. Now let's talk about block A. I chose, for the center of these stars, a dark fabric. All these are pretty dark. Then for the star points, I kind of liked the contrast there, so I chose gold fabrics. And then for the background of the stars, you'll notice on this they're all light. That's when I used these linen prints, like all of these. They're not really linen fabric, they're just called linen because they tend to look that way. And that's the colors that they are. So here's where the problem came in, and why I won't support this company, in that, okay, for the center, this is fabric 3. I'll show you in their diagram. Fabric 3 is the center. And here it looks like 4 little squares, but it tells you to cut out 10 8.5-inch squares, which is a big square. But when you go to the directions, it has 4 separate little squares. So you're probably saying, why don't I just cut this into 4 squares so I can put it together like that? Well, that won't work. You would need a 9-inch square, not an 8.5-inch square, if you were going to do that. So they need to either change their directions, or the directions of how to put it together, or they need to change their cutting directions and tell you to cut out, 84.5-inch squares. I emailed them several weeks ago now, and I have heard no response back, and for that reason, I cannot recommend their pattern. They can't get the basic instructions to match the cutting instructions, then it's not a good pattern. Now, I have an alternative way to put it together, in that so we don't have to have the 4 squares. But that's because I'm an experienced quilter. For a beginning quilter, this would be very confusing. Okay, so let's go on with making the block. What I have is 4 identical of the light prints and 4 identical of a dark print for each one of these. 4, 4, so forth. So I'm going to you lay that one aside. It only had 2 cut out. I need to cut 2 more of it. Okay, we'll just take one of these, and I've got the 4 linen prints and the 4 gold prints that are the same. And we're going to make them into half square triangles. And for the benefit of this tutorial, I'm just going to make one A star, even though once I get through with that, I will chain all these half square triangles, but then I will just make one, put one square together at a time, one block together at a time. So I'm going to take these over to the machine, right sides together, and I'm going to sew 1/4 of an inch down one side and 1/4 of an inch down the other side. And I highly recommend you do a scant 1/4 inch on this, because you can always trim it down, and I intend to trim it down. But it's real easy to have your block come up short if you don't use a scant 1/4 inch, which means just slightly smaller than a 1/4 inch. Okay, let's go over to the sewing machine and sew these half square triangles. Okay, let's cut these apart. You can either use your blade or just cut on that line that you drew from corner to corner. Need to turn my iron on too. Okay, now we're going to have 8 half square triangles, because we had 4 squares to begin with. So I am going to iron towards the darker side. Again, I'm not sure that it would matter in this instance, but that way your seam doesn't show through on the lighter fabric. So I will lay these with the darker fabric on top. And then we will set the seam by just ironing the seam first. That helps set the stitches down in there and take out any puckers or gathers or uneven stitches. And then we'll roll this open, and that will leave the side, I'll do one at a time here, that will leave this side on top, so it will be ironed towards the dark side. So let's do that real quick. Now my iron's finally getting hot enough to steam. Okay, I want to trim these up and make sure they are the right size. So let me get, there's the right size square that I need. And you know what? I bought one of those lock blocks. Let me go get it and I'll be right back. Okay, this will be my first time using it, and it just happens to be the right size. See how it locks? Oh, it locks really good. You want to line up your diagonal with your seam. And that just locks right on it, except that I just moved it. Let's see if we can try this again. Here. I also purchased a rotating cutting board, and this one was recommended by one of my viewers, and I love it. I've been using it a lot because it's on ball bearings, and it doesn't move. I mean, it does move, it doesn't break. Okay, there's one done. See, my block's almost, even with a scant 1/4 inch seam, my block is almost too small. It's gonna work, but it's not anything too big. Okay, see, I just barely was able to trim much off of that. But that works pretty good. You have to get it going the right direction to lock it in place. But it worked really good for squaring up a block. Okay, let's lay this block out now the way it's supposed to go together. And what one should we put with it? That looks like a pretty good one. Because I don't want the same fabric that's in it. Okay. That's not right. Now then, we need to find this same print. Oh, right here it is on the bottom. And we're going to put it in the corners. Okay, here is our star. Now you can see that if we had had it in, if this had been in 4 pieces, we would have put together this, 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 and this. But since it's not, we're going to sew this row together. We're going to sew these together so we make this row, and then sew this together. So I think what I will do first is sew these 2. So join me at the sewing machine for that. Now, I had taken my 1/4 inch foot off and put on just a regular presser foot to do the half square triangles, because this little flange would drag down when it went across the center of that fabric. But now I've put it back on and we're ready to sew. I just got to make sure that I'm sewing the right seams together. Now let's press this open. And I don't think it's going to matter which way it gets pressed. Okay, that one's going the right direction. And that one's going the right direction. Now then, let's just sew. No, let's do this a block at a time. We're going to add this block. We're going to chain this block, and this block. Then we're going to come back up to the top and add this one and this one down here. Then we're going to go back to the top again and add this one, this one, this one, and this one. And we'll be ready to just sew our rows together. Okay. Cut my little leader off here. Now we're ready to sew our rows, but first we need to iron our seams. So we're going to iron this row of seams this direction, this row of seams this direction, this row of seams that direction, so that they're all going opposite ways and will nest when we're done. It doesn't matter which way you iron them as long as you go opposite each row. Okay, I ironed that one wrong. I'm going to turn this sideways. It'll be a little easier for me to iron that. Okay, that's going that way. This one is coming this way. These are all going that direction. Okay. Now we're just ready to sew the rows together. So I'm going to take these over here, over to the machine. I'm going to nest my seams so that one of them's pointing this way, one of them's pointing that way. And I'll go ahead and pin this one. And we want to nest these again. You can feel it if you kind of slide them together. You'll be able to feel whether they're actually nested or not. And of course the one in the middle won't matter much, but I am going to sew with this side up so I can catch all these seams and make sure they're laying the right direction. I only have a couple on the back, but I've got quite a few here. So let's go sew these last few seams. Now, when you go over this seam, you might want to flip this back so you can see it, but we want to stitch, go right across where these two meet. I think I'll just iron these towards the middle. And there is our star block, our block A. That will go with all of our block B's. So I have 9 more of these blocks to make, and I will do that off camera, and then we'll come back together and put the quilt together. Well, I have all the blocks done now, and I have extended my dining room table with a piece of plywood to try to get it all on. I got the width pretty good, but you're not going to be able to see the bottom couple of rows until I move it up a little bit. But this is the best I can do for right now. I will eventually have a, what do you call it? The wall that you hang blocks on. A design wall. I have been living in temporary place to be close to my parents when my dad was real sick, but in the next year or so I will be moving into back into a bigger place that has more space for all my sewing. So here is my final blocks. The star blocks took me about 10 minutes a piece to put together after I'd made all the half square triangles. And I won't lie, the half square triangles took me a long time. Not necessarily sewing them, but I trimmed each and every one of them to make sure they were the right size. And I only trimmed off hairs, but it makes all the difference in the world in how your quilt goes together. So don't skip that step. Okay, it's a little bit busy, but I still love it. It has lots and lots of good coffee vibes to it, and even though I'm not a coffee drinker, I have lots of people in my family that are, and I'm sure I'm going to have plenty of people willing to take this off my hands. So let's get started now. I'm going to sew together a row at a time. I will iron all the seams on a row to the right on one row and to the left on the next row so that they nest as we go. So I will bring you along as I put it together in sequence. Here's the top 2 rows all sewn together. Now I'll keep adding a row at a time. And our quilt top is put together. And that, my friends, is a coffee lover's dream quilt. I'm real pleased with the way it turned out. It was a good pattern with the exception of the instructions that were wrong. And everyone makes mistakes. That doesn't bother me as much as the fact that they didn't get back with me and make it good. But I would recommend the pattern if they would fix the mistake that was in it. So I'm excited to get this quilted. I think I've told you that I've had trouble getting my quilts back from the long armor that I use. She's got 2 of my quilts that are going on 8 months now, and I haven't gotten them back. I was looking for alternative ways to get things quilted, and a friend gifted me a Gracie quilting frame, and it's in about 1 million pieces right now. And if I can figure out how to get it put together, I will do some of my own quilting, and I'll bring you along for some of that. I'm not 100% sure what quilt I'm going to do next. I have a whole bunch of them lined out with fabric and patterns ready to go. It just depends on which one strikes my fancy next, and I'll get started on it. It does seem that it takes me 3 weeks to complete a quilt top no matter what. I do have a full-time job, so I can only work on it mainly on weekends, and life gets in the way sometimes. So I am looking to do a few more smaller, like maybe just a quilt block in between doing the whole quilt. I know you prefer to see a whole quilt made, but I just can't produce as fast as I'd like to, so I may have some shorter videos in between. Thank you for joining me. I hope you have learned something from this, and if so, would you please like, subscribe, comment, share. Whatever you can do helps my channel, and it helps me to bring more videos to you. I appreciate each and every one of you. So until next time, remember, whatever you do, do it to the glory of the Lord.